Okay, so Joey, as we think about drawing some portraits, two things I'd like to point out is that are that first of all, we all have the same four features. We have two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, um, and just think that we all have that in common, and yet because of the incredibly vast number of variations we can have, there's nobody who looks like us. Even identical twins or triplets will have small little variations. And even though there's several of us who are born into a same family, we don't, there's huge differences between our faces as well. So that's what makes portrait drawing really tricky, is because we have to master tiny little changes in the shapes of the eyes. How wide is the nose? What does the nose look like? In the mouth, and all those kind of little details. And that's what makes it tricky. On the other hand, there are certain things that we all have in common that kind of a structure we can build our drawing on as we proceed with the drawing. When we draw a face, artists usually start with what we call a blank, and so we start with an oval shape. Okay, and it's pretty standard just because in general our faces are shaped like ovals. And ovals can be notoriously difficult to start out with. So a lot of times when I'm starting to draw, I'll go around several times before I get the shape that I really like or that I'm satisfied with as a structure to build things on. So it's not perfect, it's just a starting point. Typically when we draw faces, one of the first things that people choose to draw are the eyes. So what we have to do is figure out where exactly do the eyes go once we have drawn this oval. And you got it right on your portrait. If we look at the where the eyes are compared to the chin, let's just do a little measurement. I'm going to measure from my eraser from the middle of her eye down to about where the chin is. And I'm just going to pinch my pencil like that to take that measurement. And I'm going to compare that length, that height, to how high it is from her eye to the top of her head or her oval. And we can see that it is pretty much the same distance. So our eyes are halfway down the oval. And what we can do after we draw our blank here to get started with our portrait is we can draw, I'm going to make this darker than typical so you can see it. We draw a line across there to show that is where the eyes are going to go when we look at this oval from top to bottom. Now the next thing we have to decide is how wide are eyes, how far apart are they? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure her eye from here, from this corner to this corner, and I'm going to check to see how, or to this corner, I'm going to check to see how that length compares to the space in between her eyes. So I'm just going to use my thumb here, and I'm going to put my eraser near that inside corner and the outside corner, and that's about the distance of one of her eyes. And when we check here, we can see that the space between her eyes is about the same as one of her eyes. We can think of it this way. So she's a triclops. Okay, so we've got this, the space in the middle needs to be the width, about the same width as one of your eyes. Now, it can vary between people, but in general, we want to really keep an eye on that distance to make sure it's reflecting how it relates to the width of the eye. Now let's look to see how the distance between her eye and the side of this oval, how that relates to each other. And if we measure the eye again, it's about that wide, and we can see that just about the same distance from the eye to the outside of the oval. And again, that'll vary a little bit from person to person, but we can think of it as that our faces are about 5 eyes wide. Okay, and you can see here this side's a little smaller, this one is a little bigger. This ear's bigger, this ear's smaller. It's because models tend to not be looking exactly directly at the camera, so there'll be some little differences there. But overall, the face is about 5 eyes wide. So when it comes time to putting eyes on your face, look to see first, if you're drawing from a person or from a photograph, it doesn't matter. Does the person have are they looking directly at you? You can always tell by the ears if they're looking to one side or the other. If they're looking straight at you, you're going to be looking at almost exactly fifths. So make some little tick marks, try to decide what's about fifths, and there's a space there, and the space in the middle, it looks a little small. I'm going to make that eye a little bigger, and there we have a face that's about 5 eyes wide. And I always think it looks a little creepy unless we actually put eyes in there. So I'm going to put some eyes in there. Otherwise it looks pretty hollow. Okay. So now we know where the eyes go. We know how far they are apart from each other. We know how far they are from the side of the face. Now let's check to see. The next feature we normally try to look at, even though it can be very stressful, is the nose itself. So we're going to look at a line. I'm going to do this. This is from the top of her oval, of her head, of the blank, to the bottom. And we found that the eyes were about halfway for the eyes. Okay. Now when we look at the nose, we're going to measure the distance from the eyes to the chin, and we're going to look to see in that relationship between here and here, where does the nose go? And we can see that this is a little bit smaller than this. So between the eyes and the chin, the nose is not quite halfway. And again, that will vary with people. We can check it as you're drawing, or as you're working on your own drawing. You can check to see what that looks like. And her mouth is a little bit open, so if her mouth was closed a little bit, it would be much more close to half. So between the eyes and the chin, the nose is going to be about halfway. So that's my little guideline for where the nose is going to be. Now let's see how wide noses are. If we start here at her nostril, and I'll make it a little darker so we can see it, even though in real life we wouldn't want to draw it quite that dark. Now I'm going to draw a guideline just up here, just to see where it lines up, and I can see it goes from the inside of that eye to just about the inside of that eye. Now, as you can tell, what that means is that if her nose is as wide as the inside of that eye to the inside of that eye, her nose is as wide as one of her eyes. Now, this can vary too. I've seen people whose noses are wider. I've seen people whose noses are shorter. But in general, that's how wide our noses are. They're wider than you think. So over here, and this is a guideline. This has nothing to do with drawing the nose. The guidelines would be that the nose goes from here to here. Okay? And we can also see that we have, these are very dark lines that I probably wouldn't erase if I tried, but we have the outside curve and the outside curve. And then when we look at nostrils, we think of them as circles because they're kind of like holes, but for the most part, they're just almost like little ovals. Sometimes they're almost like triangles. Sometimes they're just a little slit. Sometimes you can't see them at all. Okay? And then there's a part, they kind of come down in the middle, and this curves around and kind of ends underneath and kind of vanishes. And then this kind of comes down in the middle. Okay? We can talk about noses more later. Okay, so you got the nose right on your drawing. I saw you did a really nice job getting that nose shape in there. All right. Let's look at the mouth. We're going to look now between the nose and the chin. So we're going to look at this distance now to find out where to put the mouth. Okay, so let's again look to see where it lines up. If I make a line from the edge of her mouth up, we can see it comes between her pupil and her iris, the edge of her iris. And on this side, it comes on the inside of that iris. Okay, so I would make guidelines because on this face, this is where things line up. Her mouth is about that wide. Okay, let's see where it is in this distance. So if I draw a line from the edge of her mouth and come over, again, this is less than half. This is smaller, this is bigger. Very often, this is 1/3 and this is 2/3. So you can see this is quite a bit less than half, but it's not quite a third. So I would come down here and not quite a third. That's where I would put the mouth. Okay, these are just guidelines that's the guideline of a line that would split right in the middle. So we know how wide mouths are. We know where they lie on the vertical plane of the face. Don't forget this. What happens a lot of times is that the left side of our brain says this is the most important part of the face, and we focus on this, this much. And we forget that we have a chin down here, a good sized chin, and we forget that we have this big forehead. Now yours came out, your proportions were really, really good. I think if you look at the chin, you probably have more of a chin than was in your portrait. Okay. But it's usually like 1/3, 2/3 or so. When we're drawing, let's say that for another lesson. When we're drawing the lips and the nose and the eyes, let's just look at proportions for this one. The next thing we're going to look at is ears, because those can be very daunting to draw. And when we draw them, they always seem like they're sticking out. Don't think of them as ears. Just like everything else, we're just going to try to think of them as weird little shapes. So we have this curve that comes up, and then it kind of comes in. This is almost shaped like a kidney bean. And it comes in, and it curves at the top, and it curves at the bottom. And then we kind of have this cashew shape in here, and then a little bit of shading here. Now, if we stick to just our oval shape, it's really going to start looking funny if we just try to stick the ears right on there. Because what you're going to notice is when we put our pencil here, we can see that that's not very much of an oval shape on the side of our heads. And over here, it's quite flat. The sides of our heads are flatter than you think. Okay, so we don't have this curve out here. After we draw our oval, then it's time to kind of carve it away a little bit or add on to it, straighten it out. So I'm going to straighten that side out. This side ended up pretty straight when I first drew it. Okay, so now where do we put ears? If we start at the top of the ear on Jennifer here, we can see that her ear is even with the top of her eye. So we come over here, and the top of her ear would be right about there. The bottom of her ear is even with her nose, like the nostril. Ears are bigger than you think, so this is where her ear would go. And you can see, I'm just going to put this on here, kind of the shape that it is, and then here's that cashew shape, and then we have some shading here. Now, time after time, I see students put the ears on, and they're the right size, and they're the right shape, but they really look like they're sticking out, and they do. And that's because we haven't finished yet. We can see that all this hair comes down to her ear, comes in front of the ear here, and also makes the ear not stick out. So the hair comes down here, and it also comes way out here past her ear. And once we get that drawn, then the ear doesn't look nearly like it's sticking out. Plus we get all the little shading in there, of course. Then that will kind of make it soften it up too. Okay, so once we get that in there, then the ear doesn't look like it's sticking out nearly as much. Okay. The other thing we tend to not fully register is that even though we drew this as a nice rounded oval, remember we can put a book on top of our head and it stays fairly well. So we kind of have this corner here, and we kind of have a corner there. And I think you did all right on this on your portrait as well, but just to kind of go through the whole outline here. So our heads are a little more shaped like this. And then down here on the chins, this does look like she has quite a rounded chin. But look at this, it's round, and then it goes straight, and then it curves up. So then it's round, and then it comes straight, and then it curves up. And the darker we draw these lines, the more it will bother us, so keep them nice and light. And then her neck comes down here. So the other ear also comes here, just above her eye. And models very often will have their heads tipped. They will be off center a little bit, and so this may not appear symmetrical. And then we would draw the top of her ear and the bottom of her ear, and then again the hair comes down, and maybe that's out a little bit. The hair comes down a little bit in front, and then we have the hair. We deal with all the hair up here. Okay, so in your drawing you did great with the hair. You did the little marks you had were just enough to give it the suggestion of what short hair looks like and what your hair looked like. Another thing is we can see her neck comes down and comes over this way, and over here her neck is right there. So it's even further to the right of where her mouth is, so her neck is a little bit over here. So obviously this has no resemblance to Jennifer Lawrence right now. I haven't given her beautiful eyes. I haven't given her any kind of lips or eyebrows. We can save that for another video and getting some of these details in. But I do want to stress also that you don't want to forget eyebrows. And it's really easy to forget. You can see they kind of go out and then they come down very pointed. It's almost like, well, they are following the contour of the face, but they're not curved like we picture eyebrows as being. very straight across, and then it takes a curve down following the contour of her face. We can get so involved in drawing a face, if we're drawing from a photograph or from life, that we can look at it and say, yes, it's done. I've got all my details. And my favorite story to tell is I had a student working on their portrait for 2 hours, and students tend to say, there, I'm done. And I try to introduce them to the idea of saying, is there anything that you think I forgot? Or is there anything you think I need to add? Because invariably a second set of eyes will reveal something that they've forgotten. And this student was very proud of themselves, and they said, there, I'm done. And when I looked at their picture, they had totally forgotten eyebrows. Something so simple, something so obvious, but they were so engrossed in drawing these features that they overlooked eyebrows. Yeah, so that's my eyebrow story. So that's just basically getting things set up. We start with an oval blank, top to bottom. We find halfway, and I call that a cookie line. And for the benefit of the students, because the old story, like if you have one sibling and there's one cookie left in the house, and your parent says you get to divide it in half, but your sibling gets to choose it, how carefully will you divide it perfectly in half? So I introduced that idea to them, because once they draw their oval, painfully try to make a half, force yourself to make a halfway line, and that's where your eyes go. I've had students draw their oval, draw their cookie line halfway for their guideline, and then literally go back and draw the eyes where they typically draw the eyes. And there's their guideline. And the left side is so powerful because they've drawn faces before. So getting back to this, draw your oval. This is halfway for your eyes. Between your eyes and your chin, the nose is about half. A little less than half. It's a little closer to the eyes. And then between the nose and the chin, the mouth is about a third of the way down. I'm gonna say 1/3 plus or minus a little bit, but the chin, it's usually about 1/3, 2/3. Okay, and then you'll be able to see where the ears line up with the eyes and the nose to get the right size for those. Okay, we'll deal with specifically drawing eyes and specifically drawing the nose and the mouth in another video. Okay, good luck.